Today, I want to talk about productivity and really about some of the work that ABARES has been doing in this area. Some of what I have to say was touched upon this morning, but I'm hoping to develop that somewhat from what you heard this morning. And some of it we've been talking about for a number of years now, and I will update that, but I'm going to add some new stuff too, so bear with me while I'm doing that. Now, these are the issues I want to talk about. Productivity is very important to Australian agriculture, and I'll explain why in a moment, or demonstrate why. Also, it's useful to review how we're going on that front. I want to talk about some of the ways to get to improved productivity and growth in productivity, things that influence that, and some further thoughts about what we might be able to do in a policy sense that might help improve that. Now, before I get any further though, I better define what I mean by productivity. Now, it sort of means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Some people look at yield and say, well, we've increased yield, so therefore productivity's increased. Well, I'd suggest it's a bit more than that. Yield, for example, is a pretty important part of productivity, but productivity basically is what you get out of your operation relative to what you get in. If you think about it in dollar terms, it's how much bang do you get for your buck? In other words, you put a bunch of inputs in, and I get a bunch of outputs, and hopefully you can keep growing those outputs relative to inputs. Now, why is productivity important? If you look at this graph here, you can see that we've tried to estimate what the gross value of agricultural production in Australia would be if there was no productivity growth. And you can see, you get a picture of that. Then we can overlay it with, this is what happens with productivity. If we didn't have productivity growth of the rates that we've been able to achieve over an extended period, and this dates from the early 1950s, our agricultural sector would be in a pretty sad state at the moment. About in that final year there, that's roughly, I think that's about 2006 or 7 or something, up here. About 2/3 of that is that value of production is due to productivity growth. So it's extremely important. Productivity enables our farmers to better deal with some of the ups and downs associated with climatic conditions, as we've seen in the past few years, all over the place. It allows us to get more out of any given set of resources, and it also has environmental benefits. Less chemicals, for example, for any given level of output you might want to get. Better use of our land, better use of our water resources, and that's been important. Now, how are we going? Now, you've seen these, if you've been to these sessions before in the past, you'll see that this is a fairly familiar looking graph. It's been updated to 2008. But over the orange thing at the top tells you total factor productivity growth has averaged 1.3% a year since the late 70s. And this is based on our farm survey data, because that's when we started. 1977-78 was the first year we did what we call broadacre survey. And that's essentially dry land, beef, sheep and grains. Now, that productivity has been achieved for a couple of different things. First of all, outputs have risen slightly on average over that period. Not a lot, but slightly. But most importantly, the inputs to achieve those outputs have declined much more significantly. And that's what gives you the productivity growth, and that's what gives you your profitability. Look at the dairy industry now. In one sense, you might look at it and say, well, that's much the same, but actually it's not quite the same. If you look how it's been achieved there, we've got total factor productivity of about 0.8% a year. And that's good, it's positive, not as high as for the broadacre sector, but it's been achieved in a different way. We've had an increase in outputs, but we've also had a very large increase in inputs. So in other words, I could be very colloquial and say, well, they've achieved a lot of that output growth by pouring more feed down the necks of dairy cows. And in fact, that's true to some extent. It's not entirely true, but we've also increased other sorts of inputs that have gone into it. So a very different way that's been achieved. I could, as an aside, say that probably reveals some vulnerabilities for the dairy industry that perhaps isn't there for others. In other words, it's built on pretty high costs. It's great while prices are good internationally. If we got a significant downturn in prices, we may have a different picture start to emerge. But at the moment, it's working, and farmers will adjust if it's not working. Now, Philip showed this morning as just a standard thing to say, well, productivity was growing strongly till about 1994 or thereabouts, according to our estimates, and then it's flattened off. Now, there's probably a range of reasons for that. But before I get into those, I just want you to focus on this one. So there it is, total factor productivity. You can see that it has varied quite substantially and taken some big hits in droughts because your output goes down, but the inputs are probably much the same. So it's important to know, well, okay, you could say, well, it's all seasonal conditions. Well, it's not all seasonal conditions, as this next slide will show. If you take out the seasonal effects, you can still see underlying productivity rose quite solidly up until about the mid-90s or thereabouts, and then it's flattened out. So there's other factors at play other than just seasonal conditions. Industry-wise, interesting story. If you look at, I'd focus on industries here, cropping, very high productivity through to the mid-90s, and has fallen off very substantially if you look at the orange columns in over the more recent period. So why is that? Well, there's probably a range of factors, including seasonal conditions, but there'll be other factors I'll touch upon in a moment. In contrast, beef has lifted its productivity quite substantially from the first period, the blue, through to the overall period, the orange. And sheep have also done likewise from a fairly ordinary sort of performance back in the earlier period. That was when we were going through the collapse of the reserve price scheme, for example. But the sheep industry has, in many respects, revitalised itself. There's been a shift more towards meat in general, whether it's mutton or the lamb industry, and there's been various elements of that that enabled the industry to lift its productivity very substantially. In fact, if you looked at that growth, you could say from the worst to the best, it's probably performed just as well as the cropping industry, although it's a bit hard to tell off that graph. Now, I want to talk a bit about pathways to productivity. Now, before I get there, there's basically three, in our view, three main ones. There's a range of ways to improve productivity, but if you look at this, before we get into it, we'd suggest there's three ones. Technological change, technological efficiency gains. So in other words, the first one is coming up with new technologies. The second one is how efficiently do we use those and adopt, and that includes adopt them. And the third one is structural adjustment, which is an important part of the overall picture. So let me just, this stylised diagram here. So we've got a production front here. So that just means what do you get for outputs for a given set of inputs. It's a very simplistic thing just to basically illustrate the point. So we have the front here is getting pushed out by R&D, new innovation, new technologies and so forth coming forward. Could be new varieties, all sorts of things. And our better performers are moving out and picking up those new things quite quickly. So our top farmers are out there right at the dark green line, or close to it. Now, some of our, and we're indebted to the GRDC, the Grains Research and Development Corporation, for very strong support of our work in this area. And this is part of that. If you look at grain growers, so up until about 2000, they'd been increasing their productivity, the better ones, at about 2% a year. But since then, it's fallen right off to around 0.5% a year. So that was technological innovation. This is technical efficiency. We've got a bunch of other farmers, represented by these blue dots, all over the place. Some are up there already, some are down here. This is more like your average performers. And they have been gradually improving their efforts. They're still short of or some have moved right up, but some are still quite short of, way short, in fact, of the productivity frontier. Now, as it says there, the gap between the very best and the sort of average performers has been widening, about 0.3% a year, ever since we've been doing farm surveys. The other important part I put on just for illustrative purposes is these people here. Some are leaving the industry, and that's contributing to the overall productivity of the sector, because it enables the remaining farmers to amalgamate, merge, whatever you want to call it, achieve greater size economies that they may not otherwise have been able to achieve. And they were the better performers in the first place. So they've been able to lift productivity. A major part of it is due to that, and I'll come back to that in a moment.